Hey everybody, so today we are going to be working on our April 2013 watercoloring monthly card kit, and this month's kit features Whimsy Stamps Sunset Rose by Elizabeth Bell. And I really love this one because the girl's not facing you, and I thought it'd be really fun for a watercoloring to do this, this sunset background right here. So I've already stamped my girl on Canson 140-pound watercolor paper. I have my piece of paper towel here to dab my water brush off. I have my Tim Holtz ink palette that's holding my distress inks. And I have a couple of my Zig water brushes, the medium and the detail tip. And all this stuff can be found over at the store, HeathersHobbieHaven.com, and I'll put a little pop-up there on the screen. So let's color. Okay, I also forgot to say that I stamped my image with Ranger Archival Jet Black ink. Okay, so I've already got my water brush ready. I've tested it on the back of my hand to make sure it's not too wet. It's just damp, and there's a whole nother video on that further down on my list of videos if you want to watch that to see how wet your water brush should be. So we're going to get started by doing this background right here, and I'm going to start out with my tumbled glass distress ink. And I've got a little piece of acetate here that I've taped to a piece of cardstock just so I can see the color, the color when I put it on the acetate sheet. So I'm going to grab me a little bit of my tumbled glass and I'm going to stick it on here. Actually, I'm going to get a couple of dabs like that. And my brush is pretty wet because I just squeezed it. So I'm going to swirl it around in there and kind of puddle it up. And it's going to dilute it just a little bit. And I might give my brush just another little squeeze just so it adds a little bit more water in there. Okay, like that. Now I'm going to dab my brush off and just get some more of that ink off there. And I'm going to wipe my brush off on my paper towel and get it all cleaned off again because we don't want to have quite that much ink on there. And then I'm going to use this ink to start my background. I'm going to move that over here just a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to start out with my blue. Actually, I'm going to flip her around so I can go away from her, the sky here, and try not to paint all this stuff down here. So I'm going to grab a little bit of my blue on my brush, and I actually wasn't worried about any of these flowers when I was painting. So I'm just going to start here above the sunset and kind of bring it down here and around her hand, and I'm not going to let it dry, so I'm going to come back and I'm just going to work my brush back and forth and pick up a little bit of that ink and drag it up here into the sky. So let's work some of that more up this way. So let's pull it. My brush is still pretty wet from when I was putting it on my ink palette thing, so it's wiping pretty good. Okay, so my paper is pretty saturated on this side, so I'm going to go ahead and leave that side. I'm going to come over here and we're going to do on this side. So again, I'm going to grab a little bit on my brush and I'm going to go right along this basket here, kind of bring it out here, and then use the water in my brush to bring that up more onto my paper up here. Dilute that a little bit and bring it more up here. I'm going to grab a little bit more, and whenever I touch the paper it's picking up some more of that ink, and let's do right here too because that's in between a space of her dress right there. And I'm going to bring that up there, and then let's add a little bit right here above her hat. So I'm going to lay down some ink and then work that around. Just spreading that out so it's not quite so dark. Okay, so it's pretty light right there, but I'm going to let my paper dry because it's really wet, and then we're going to come back and we're going to add another coat. Alright, so I've let that dry for a little bit, and I actually got impatient and went and got my heat tool and just zapped it with the heat tool so it would dry it. You don't want to add more coats until you have dried, it's completely dry. Okay, so now I'm going to, it's pretty blue down here, but I'm going to add a little bit more up here at the top. So I'm going to go ahead and get some more of my paint I have here on my acetate sheet, and I'm just going to rub that around up here. Give it a little bit more blue. And if your brush is dragging, go ahead and give it another squeeze. Depends on how much ink you used there in the first time. I'm going to add some more over here. I didn't quite go clear up to the top of the page when I put down my ink the first time. Okay. Add some more over here in this corner. And my brush is dragging a little bit, so I'm going to give it a little bit of squeeze and dab it off on my paper towel. Maybe get a little bit in here. You just have to look at your page and say, do I want it to be a little bit bluer over here? Is it just fine? It's all on personal preference. You just got to kind of look at it and decide, how blue you want it to be. Okay, I think that looks pretty good for me, so I'm going to let that dry, and then we're going to add a coat of something else. Okay, so now let's add some Stormy Sky onto our palette here. So I'm going to grab a little bit of that onto my brush, and I've got just a little dab there on the end. And I'm not going to be too technical with it. I'm just going to start over here on this side, and I'm just going to kind of wipe it in a kind of a zigzaggy motion. And when it runs out, I'm going to go grab a little bit more. And maybe start in a little bit different area, maybe go down here. And I'm going to give my brush another squeeze so I can get it a little bit wetter. And we're just going to wipe that around here in the sky and add a little bit bluer, some little bit bluer sections. Okay, and grab a little bit maybe and put over here. And I'm grabbing a little bit more paint onto my brush. Oops. Wipe that around. Maybe add a little bit over here. And use my water to kind of spread it out. And then let's add a few little drops over here on this side. We're going to wipe our water over the top of that. Grab a little bit more for up here, maybe. Okay, I'm liking that. Maybe add a little bit more over here on this side, just a little bit right in here. And again, I'm just going by how it looks, how I want it to look. I'm just kind of looking at it and going, I want to add some more up here, over there, and just going from there. So again, we're going to let this dry, and then we're going to add another color. So now let's add a little bit of chipped sapphire. So again, I'm going to grab a little bit on the end of my brush. And this one's pretty dark, so I'm not going to add quite as much as the other two. I'm just going to pick a few little places and just kind of go down like that. And I'm going to get my brush wet, so I've given it a squeeze. And I'm just going to kind of go over that line and soften it up just a bit, spread it out. I'm collecting ink, so I'm going to wipe my brush off. And we're going to go back over that. Like that looks pretty good. Maybe add a little bit up here. Maybe. Kind of soften that with just the water. And I want to add a little bit over here. So I've run out of ink, so I'm just using my water now to kind of spread those lines out just a little bit. You don't want them to be quite so harsh. Swirl this around a little bit there. Get a little bit closer to our hat where I missed it. Okay, I'm thinking that looks okay. Let's see if we can do something with this right here. Get a little bit closer to her hat, maybe a little bit right there. So I'm going to grab a little bit of my tumbled glass and come in here a little bit closer. I didn't get very close. Okay, so I've got a little bit of my tumbled glass, and I'm actually going to kind of go over the top of this just a little bit more. So that's looking kind of like sky. I'm not too crazy about this little swirly thing right here. I maybe should have done a few more little lines over there, but I'm not going to be able to move it now, so we're just going to deal with that, and we're going to move on down here to the sun. So for that, I'm going to start with mustard seed. So I'm going to grab a little bit of my mustard seed on the end of my brush. I'm going to go in here, and I'm just going to swirl it around inside of my setting sun. Give it a nice orange or yellow back tone, like that, and then we're going to let that dry. Okay, so I've let that dry, and now we're going to go in and we're going to add some dried marigold. So I'm going to grab just a tiny dab of that on the end of my brush, and I want to start down here at the base of my sun. Oops, I'm going to need a little bit more than that. So I'm going to grab a little bit more. I'm going to start right here at the base of my sun. I'm going to go over here between the little rabbit's ears and this side. And then if you have too much ink on your brush, you want to wipe it off. And then you're going to come back and just use that little bit of ink you put down to kind of push up towards the top. And around here like that. And that'll give it a little bit more of an orange cast on there. But we also want to do a little bit of a halo on the outside of our sun, because when it's setting, it usually has a glow that kind of goes around the outside. So I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of my orange, my dried marigold, right around the edge like this. And then if I have too much, I'm going to wipe it off. And then I'm going to use just my water to kind of flick it up here away from my sun so that it's going to cast a little bit of a shadow, it looks like. Okay, like that. Okay, now we're going to grab a little bit of wild honey, and again we're going to start down here at the base of our sun. So I'm going to put a little bit along the edge here at the base, and I still have quite a bit of ink on my brush, so I'm going to wipe that all off, and then I'm going to come in with just my water on my brush and push it up. And again, I'm letting it just go until there's no more. And if you get over here and you got quite a bit of ink on the end of your brush, see all mine on there? I'm going to wipe all that off, and I'm going to come back with just my water and come up here towards the top. And again, we want to add some along our shadow here. So I'm going to grab a little bit of that wild honey, and I'm going to put a little bit right here along the edges. Maybe just a tiny bit close to the sun here. Wipe my excess off, and then go in with just my water and feather that up just a little bit more. Okay, and I've collected quite a bit of ink, so I'm going to wipe that off again, and then come in here with a little bit more of my water. I want to spread it out just a little bit so that it comes up here and it fades into blue. So now let's add our last coat to our sun here to add a little bit more shading in there. And for that I'm going to use Rusty Hinge. And I'm going to lay that again right down here next to the grass. The very bottom of our sun. Put a little bit on there like that. Wipe my excess off. I'm going to go in, I'm just going to flick the edge of that line and pull it away from the bottom towards the top. Just a little bit. And then I'm going to wipe my brush off. I'm going to come back and flick it again if it's not soft enough for me until I get it up there where I would like that, and that makes it have a nice dark glow there at the bottom. So now let's go do the skin. And she doesn't have that much this time, because she's facing away from us, but she's got her arm right here and her hand over here. And so I'm going to start with my Tattered Rose. Grab a little bit of that on the end of your brush. And I put it down first where I want it to be shadowed, where I want it to be darkest. So I'm going to go right along the bottom of her hand. And on this one, I'm going to go along the sleeve and around the back of her arm. Okay, and by now my ink is run out from my brush, so I'm just going to use the water in my brush to spread that out onto her arm to the other side. And we're going to go along this side. Give it a nice pink cast. Maybe add a little bit more down here to this one a little bit. So after I've let that dry for a second, I'm going to go add a little bit of shadow. So I'm going to go ahead and grab a little bit of paint I've mixed. So I've got Tattered Rose and Tea Dye mixed together, and I use them all the time, so I have them now mixed in a little circle in my palette, so I don't ever have to go and make more until it runs out. I'm just going to use that as a shadow, so I'm going to run that along the bottom of her fingers here. And along the back of her hand, maybe do underneath of her hand a little bit, and I've run out, so I'm going to grab a little bit more. Maybe do down here on the bottom of her fingers a little bit. And then I'm going to wipe my brush off, and then come back and soften that line and pull it towards the top of her arm. And this one I'm going to pull it to the side. I just want to darken it up just a little bit and add some shadows in there. So for her hair, it's a little bit smaller area, so I'm going to grab my small detail brush, and we're going to paint her hair with walnut stain. That'll give me a little bit more control because it's got a tinier tip on it. And I'm going to go ahead and I want to start where I want it to be the darkest, and I want it to be darkest up here underneath of her hat. So I'm just going to lay down a little bit of ink up here, and then I'm going to use that ink to pull down into her little ponytail here, or her braid, all the way down to the bottom, like that. And then I'm going to grab a little bit more because I got a couple more sections of hair over here. So I've got this cute little curly Q right here. So again, right underneath of her hat, and then use your brush. Oops, I got quite a bit, so I'm going to wipe my brush off and use that little bit I put down to come out here onto my little curl. And then the same for this one right here. She's got a little one. So I'm going to put a little bit right next to her hat and then come out. And that's a pretty small area, so you got to be really careful. And I probably won't go back and add more to that one. I'm just going to leave that. So while I was doing that, this part of her braid has dried. So I'm going to add a little bit more shadows in there. So I'm going to grab a little bit on my brush, and each place that her little ponytail or her braid kind of looks like it kind of dips in, I'm going to put a little bit in the little V right there. Like this. And I'm going to wipe my brush off. I'm going to come back and I'm going to very lightly go over the edges and just spread it out just a little bit until it fades into the rest of her hair, but it kind of darkens up those little creases a little bit. Let's do the same thing down here where it comes out of her little scrunchie. So I'm going to add a little bit next to that scrunchie, and then I'm going to come in with just my water and flick it down further onto her ponytail there. And I think I'll actually darken up here close to her hat again too. So I'm going to come in here with a little bit more. Darken that up. As her hat's tipping onto her head, it's going to be pretty shadowed there. Same with this side. Let's add a little bit more in there. Darken it up just a tad more there. Okay, and so you can add some more ink until you're happy with how it looks, and I'm happy with this. So we're going to let that dry a second, and we are going to move on and do her dress. Okay, so for her dress and her hat, I have used scattered straw, and so let's grab a little dab of that on our brush. And I'm going to lay down my ink where I want it to be darkest first. So I want it to be darkest right along her arm right here. So I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit right there. And the back of her sleeve. And the back of her dress. And back here behind her arm is going to be a little bit darker. I'm going to kind of fill that in. I got quite a bit of ink there. So now I'm going to take my brush with just my water. I've wiped it off, and I'm going to spread this out towards the front of her dress. Same with down here. We're going to come down and we're going to move this ink out here further onto her dress. And if your brush is dragging, give it a little squeeze because it should smoothly go over the paper. And again, I'm not worried about these flowers or that grass. I'm just sweeping right over the top of those. So let's add, I want my ink to come clear out here and give this side of her dress a light yellow color. Okay, I think that looks perfect, so I'm going to leave it like that. So it's a little bit darker over here, but as it comes over here, it's a lot lighter. Okay, and so same for her hat. Now let's grab a little bit more ink on here. And again, I want this back side of her hat to be the darkest, so I'm going to lay down my ink back here on the back, and the back side of this. And then we're going to come in and smooth it out this way towards the front. And I didn't wipe my brush off this time because it's got to go quite a ways, and I think by the time I get to the other side over here, it will have turned into nothing. So let's go over here. And I don't want this to dry, so I'm going to go up here and wipe this line a little bit. I want to go over, clear over to the other side of her hat with all of that. Just so by the time you get clear over here to this side, it's a nice light yellow color. And be careful when you're going by her hair there, because if you touch it, you're going to get a little bit of your brown bleeding in there. Alright, so we've let that dry for a minute or so, and I'm going to go in and I want to add another coat. So I'm going to grab some more of my scattered straw on my brush, and I'm going to darken up her dress even more. So I want it to be darkest back here, so I'm going to add a whole coat back here. And let's get behind her arm. Okay, and that's quite a bit of ink there behind her arm, so I'm going to wipe my brush off, and I'm going to use that little bit that I put down to kind of spread up here towards the top of her dress, because it's going to be a little bit lighter, I think, on this side where she's facing the sunset. Okay, and same for her sleeve. I want to darken up the back side of her sleeve, so let's grab a little bit of ink, spread some ink on there, come back with just your water and kind of wipe that forward. Got quite a bit, so I'm going to wipe my brush off again. Come back in, spread that forward. And we'll move down here to this section. And I want it to be dark right next to where her dress is touching her sleeve. So I'm going to come up here like this. And maybe get a couple of these cute little wrinkles she's got going there. Okay, and then I'm going to wipe my brush off. And then we're going to come in and I'm going to soften this line. And I've got quite a bit of ink there, so I'm going to wipe a little bit up and then wipe my brush off. And we're going to same thing down here. Add a little bit. Spread those lines out just a tad. And I want it to be darker down here at the bottom of her dress, so I'm going to kind of concentrate on wiping my ink towards the bottom down here and along the bottom, so that when it runs out I can use just a little bit of my run out over here on the side. Then we'll go up here and add another coat to her hat. So we want it to be darkest back here in the back. So I'm going to add a little bit back here. Get down kind of in between these flowers a little bit. Maybe darken that up because the flowers are going to be casting a shadow. And then my ink is run out, so I'm just using my water to lightly spread it up here into the top of her hat so it's shinier up there at the top. Okay, and let's do the same thing down here at the bottom. So again, wipe it down here at the bottom of her hat. And maybe go right next to these flowers. Get a little bit in there where they're going to cast a shadow. And then come back and use that ink to darken that up. Okay, my ink's run out, so I'm just using now my water just to blend it in so there's not such a harsh line right there. Just like that. So next, let's work on the grass before we get to adding a bunch more colors to this. I'm going to use red on this basket, and I don't want to accidentally touch it, so I'm going to do this grass first. And so for that, we're going to start with bundled sage. So give your brush a squeeze if it's getting dry, because you got quite a bit of an area there to fill in. So I'm going to grab some bundled sage on my wet brush, and I want it to be darkest. Let's start up here by the sunset. So I want it to be darkest up here on the horizon. So I'm going to add a little bit in there, get in between the bunny ears, right along this, and then I'm just going to start pulling down that line. And I'm going to be careful to try not to touch her dress. We're just going to pull that down onto this. Okay. And then I'm going to grab a little bit more. And she's kind of sitting, I'm going to say she's kind of sitting on a little knoll right here, so it kind of bumps up a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and take a little bit more of my bundled sage, and I'm going to go underneath my rabbit and make it a little darker right there. I ran out, so I'm going to grab a little bit more. And we're going to go right over here underneath of her. And then we're just going to take our water and go over that line and soften it up. And bring it down more into my grass. Now it's pretty good for a first coat. So let's go over here and do this side. So we're going to put a little bit right here. And I'm trying to be careful not to color her finger green. And we'll go right along this and kind of fill in a little bit over here on this side of the basket too, because it's going to be, you got to have something over there. Okay, I think that looks pretty good for a first coat, but I think I'm going to darken this side up a little bit, so I'm going to grab a little bit more. I didn't get down here very far, so I'm going to go ahead and add my dark up here, because I want to start with where I want it to be darkest first, and then pull down. Just going to pull that down and add a little bit more color down in this grassy area right there. And maybe a little bit more over on this side. Careful around my bunny. Okay, and let's add a little bit more. I didn't go very far down over here either. So let's go ahead and add a little bit more on this side, just a tad more. Get down here underneath of Elizabeth's name here and add a little bit of green. Alright, so let's go ahead and add some peeled paint to our grass. So again, I'm going to start up here by my sunset. So I'm going to add a little bit of that right along there and just kind of work it down just a little bit. And I didn't have very much on my brush, so I'm just using my water now just to kind of blend it in down here. Okay, and then we're going to grab a little bit more. Got to do the other side. So again, we'll lay that down right up here where the sunset is and just work it down. But I don't want to go all the way. I just want it to fade out there into nice light green. And then this cute little bunny has got a little patch right between his ears. So I'm going to get just a little bit right in there. And then I'm going to go down here and add some underneath of him. So we're going to go right on the bunny, underneath her. Okay, and I have quite a bit, so I'm going to wipe that off. And I'm going to come back and soften that line with just my water. Just pulling it down and making it so it's not quite so harsh. Just soften that edge just a little bit more. Okay, and we got to do this side over here too. So let's go ahead and move over here. Grab a little bit of your peeled paint. And I'm going to start right here underneath this basket. Kind of work around her hair and her hand. And then use just my water to kind of feather that line out. Okay. And then lastly, and this is already dried up here, so I'm going to go ahead and go in and I'm going to add my last color, which is Forest Moss. And that's really dark, so I'm going to get just a little bit on the end of my brush. And I'm just going to add that right along this skyline right here, just a tiny, tiny bit. So it's really dark where it looks like it dips into the behind the horizon there. And I ran out, so I'm going to go ahead and grab just a little bit more. I'm going to add a little bit more on this side. Okay, and then I'm going to wipe my brush off. And then I'm just going to go in and just kind of tap my brush up and down on the edge of that line. I'm going to dab my brush off and go over here and do this side. Because I don't want the line to really go anywhere, I just want to soften the edge a little bit. Like that. So while that's drying, so we can go do the rabbit, let's go up here and grab these leaves on her hat. And so for that, I'm going to use peeled paint. I'm going to grab a little bit of my peeled paint, and I'm going to go in and get some of these leaves. And here's a leaf. And I'm just kind of adding a little bit, and it's okay that the first leaf is really dark, and then as I've moved back, they've gotten lighter because my ink has run out. So now I'm going to move that ink around, wipe my brush off, come back, move this ink around, dab my brush off, come back, rub this ink around. Again, I dabbed, come back, move this one around. And there's one I missed, so I'm going to grab a little bit more. I'm going to go over here and get this one right here. There's a little leaf. And here's one right here. Go back and swirl these around a little bit more. So we'll let those dry and we'll come back and we'll add another coat here after a bit. So for our rabbit, we are going to use pumice stone. So I'm going to grab a little bit of my pumice stone, and again, you want to lay down where you want it to be darkest, so I want this bottom to be darkest, so I'm going to lay a little bit down along that. And then he's got these great little wrinkles right here, so I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit in there like so. And then I'm going to take that ink, and I'm just going to work it up to the top of his little ears. And that gives him a nice first coat. So we're going to let that dry. But while that's drying, we're going to go over here and we're going to work on this basket. And I'm going to switch to my detail brush because it's got a little small area. And I'm going to use Vintage Photo. So let's grab a little bit of that. And we're going to do the basket down here underneath. And it actually goes over here. And there's a little patch that's right past her little ponytail right here. And it's really a small area, so I didn't get too technical, I just kind of colored it in. Then we're going to go up here too, and we're going to do the handle. So again, I've got a little bit more, and I'm going to start at the base of her handle. Same with this side, so it's a little bit darker. And I got quite a bit of ink, so I'm going to wipe my brush off. And then I'm going to come in, and I'm just going to use that little bit I laid down to push up here towards the top of the basket. That'll give it a nice light top. Okay, so while that was drying, or while our rabbit was drying, let's go, or while that basket dries, let's go add another coat to our rabbit. So I'm going to grab some more pumice stone. And again, I lay down where I want it to be darkest, so right along his bottom. And he's got these great wrinkles, so do those. And I'm going to come in, I'm not going to quite wipe all this stuff off of my brush yet. I think I'll go in and let it kind of fade out a little bit more. He's kind of light. Go just like that. So he's really got really light ears, but his bottom is a lot darker down here, and these little wrinkles he's got going on. Actually, I think I'm going to go in and add just a little bit more to his wrinkles, and maybe a little dab down here on his bottom. Okay, and then I'm going to leave him like that, and we're going to go over here and we are going to work on, let's add another coat to our leaves up here. So for our leaves, I'm going to add another little coat of my peeled paint. So I still have my detail brush so I can get in there a little bit closer. I'm going to add just a tiny dab here. Let's darken him up just a little bit more. Mine are looking kind of pale and pitiful. Okay, then I'm going to wipe my brush off, and I'm going to come in and soften that line. And you can drag it as far up on your leaves as you want, and leave some of the tips a little bit lighter. You can make them all dark green. Just depends on how far you want to push that ink up. And I've collected quite a bit, so I'm going to wipe my brush off again. And come in and just move that around a little bit more. Softening those edges just a bit more. Okay, I think those look pretty good. So let's go down here and do this cute tablecloth, or this cute basket cover she's got right here. So for that, I'm going to switch my medium brush because it's quite a big area. I want to cover the whole thing up real quickly with barn door. So I've grabbed a little bit of my barn door, and I want it to be darkest right on this side of the basket because she's kind of leaning back and it's going to cast a shadow. So I'm going to add a little bit right along the edge of that handle. Okay, and I have quite a bit of ink still, so wipe that off and then come in and spread this ink you've laid down over to the other side. I'm just lightly working it over there. So the other side of the cloth is a lighter red color. Okay, like that. So we're going to go up here also and do her flowers. I'll grab a little bit of barn door on my brush. And actually this little hat band too. So let's add a little bit. Whoops, I colored her hat a little bit. Like there on the edges. And then we're going to use that little bit to come towards the middle. Dab my brush off. Come up a little bit closer. Yeah, that's a nice light coat. Okay, and then for the flowers, I'm going to go in and I'm just going to swirl my ink around on each one of those flowers. I'll grab a little bit more. And I'm going to try to be careful that I don't color her hat. And I have quite a bit, so I'm going to go ahead and move over to this one and add a little bit onto that one. Okay, that looks pretty good for a first coat. So let's let that dry a second and we'll come in and we'll add a second coat. Alright, so let's add our second coat of our barn door. I'm going to grab a little bit of that, and I've switched to my detail brush so I can have a smaller end. And on this tablecloth, or on her basket cover here, she's got a little section right here that like is folded inside, so I'm going to make that really dark. And then it kind of looks like it's, well, bent. It's got some little dips here, like this one looks like it kind of goes behind that line. So I'm going to go ahead and give that fold a little bit of a darker shade. And same for right here, it looks like there's a little bit of a fold. It looks like it kind of dips down inside. And then I'm going to take and wipe my brush off. And I'm going to soften this line by pulling it away over here towards the outside edge of her basket over here. So it's still light over here on this side, but it's darker in that little crease. And it actually looks like this one maybe should curve inside too. Right here looks like it kind of folds up so that it goes like that. And this right here probably should have been basket and then maybe air in there. I'm unsure on that. It's kind of hard to tell what that is, but I'm going to color it all the way in with this red since I've already colored it red. And then I've got a little bit on my brush left still, so I'm going to kind of darken this little section up. It's kind of light for me. Just give it a little bit more paint on there. Okay, so I'm liking all the folds on that. So let's go up here and darken up her hat band. Get right in there on this side and a little bit close to that leaf. And then we're going to spread that to both sides here. Okay, and I'm liking how dark I got my flowers the first time, so I'm going to leave those. So let's let that dry a second, and we'll add a little bit of our black soot to our flowers. Okay, let that dry. So I want to add a little bit of shadows in here to my flowers and to my hat band. So for that, I've taken barn door and a little bit of black soot, and I've mixed them onto my little acetate sheet right here. And I'm going to use that little bit of mixed color to add a little bit of shadows in here. So I'm going to pick up some of that. And let's just do some of the insides of these petals. So like this one looks like it's kind of inside a little bit. And the black soot just adds, I have just barely put any in there, so it made it just a little bit darker. Okay, I'm going to grab another little dot. And the same thing down here. Let's get a couple of these inside ones. So I'm just going to add, let's do inside that one. Maybe do the back of that one. A little bit on this one. And then for this one back here, let's get a couple of these inside folds. Get this one's kind of in the back. Maybe this side like that. That darkens it up just a little bit. Okay, for our hat band, I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit in the back. And maybe a little bit close here to the front. And dab my brush off. And just bring that out here just a little bit into the middle. I think I'll actually add a little bit down here to my basket too, as long as I'm darkening and adding some shadows. So I think I'll get really close right here on this edge where her little basket cover's touching her hair there. Add a little bit right in there just to give it a little bit more depth. And then maybe some of these inside sections. That just a little bit more shadow. Gives it a nice texture. Spread that out and darken that little section up just a little bit more there. Okay, yeah, I'm liking how those look. Okay, so that's our girl so far. She's done, but I also took my Ranger Tim Holtz Distress Marker in the peeled paint, and I went in down here on some of this grass. It's just like little, whoops, don't get my paint in my acetate sheet there. I took my marker and I used the fine tip section, and I just did some of these stems and some of this grass. Just colored those in and worked my way over here to this side. And it looks like some of the grass blades kind of go up onto my basket right there. So I'm going to go ahead and get those. And I didn't ever worry about those flowers. I just left them whatever color they got painted. Most of mine are still fairly white. But if they turned out blue or they were orange or green or whatever color got on them, I was fine with that. So there's my distress marker that just filled in some of those grass blades perfectly. So that is Sunset Rose. Let's put her together. Okay, so I think I have everything here I need to put my card together. And so I've got my girl, and let's go ahead and mount her on this orange piece first. That way she's all ready to go. And because it's watercolor paper, I tend to use a little bit extra adhesive on the back just so it holds it down more, because it got wet and this piece was pretty wet for me, and so it's kind of bent. So I'm going to use extra to hold that down. Okay, so we've got her mounted. Let's set her over here on the side. And then let's put all these flowers right there so I don't lose those. So then you've got this great brown matte piece. We're going to take our brown matte piece and we're going to take an orange dot piece, or if you prefer, you can use the ice cream cones on the back. I'm going to put that down first. Okay, I'm going to mount that to this cute brown one. Just like so. And next comes this little flower ones, or if you prefer, you could use the checks on the back. Totally up to you. Switch it around, cut it up, use your punches on it to make a decorative border if you like. Totally up to you. Okay, this one, and I'm going to try to, it's the same size as the other one, so I'm going to kind of watch this side to see how much of a mat, or how much matting I have on there, and then make sure it's lined up over here with the top and the bottom so that it's not crooked. Like that. And then next comes this piece with the scalloped edges. So I'm going to tape that down. Okay, and it's more, I would say it's more towards the top than the bottom. So it's up just slightly more towards the top than it was to the bottom part. Okay, and then next you have this great piece of lace. So I'm going to put that on. And I cheat, and I've got some Scotch tape, just plain Scotch tape. And I tape it onto the back. So I'm going to put one side on so that it's straight here. And then we're going to tip it back over so I can see how straight it is on the other side. But that way it keeps it from falling off. I can never get the adhesive to stick just right. Okay, like that. Make sure it's straight. Flip it over. Tape it down. Like that. And then next comes our girl. Okay, and for her I use some pop dots. So I'm going to go ahead and pop dot that. So she's sticking up. Oops. Okay. And then we'll get all the stickers off. Get on there. Okay, and then she goes like so. And I just wanted the lace poking out underneath there. Put her on there. Okay, and then next, oh, I probably should have adhered it to the back first before I put the pop dots on, but that's all right. We'll just add that now. I'll just kind of hold it up a little bit. I usually adhere the card front to the card base after I've put the lace on or the ribbon. I just forgot. Okay, I'll put that on there. And then next we have some flowers. So I've got all those over here. So it looks like I have a big green flower, and then I did this little daisy looking, whoops, move up a little bit so you can actually see. Little daisy looking one, and then of course a green one in the middle of that. And then we've got brown, green, brown for that. So what I did is I have my a paintbrush, and for the petals on these, I just kind of rolled the ends. So I just kind of held it and rolled over the ends of these flowers. Give them a little bit of dimension like that. So it's kind of popped up just a little bit. Same for this one. Again, I just held onto it onto my paintbrush and then gave them a little, and my fingernail's kind of holding right towards the center here of the flower, so it kind of poofs it up. And you can do that if you want, or you can leave them flat. But that one's going to go on this one. And then same for these. I gave each one of these, and because these are smaller, I moved more towards the end of my paintbrush, so it only curves them a little bit. Okay, and we grab the green one. Same thing, I'm using more towards the end of the paintbrush. And I'm just curling over the ends, giving me a little bit of dimension there so they kind of pop down. Okay, and then I'm going to use my liquid adhesive to adhere all those. So let's put a little bit of that on the back of this cute brown one. And I want it to kind of go over the top of the little indentations of the petal. So I'm going to twist it a little bit. Okay, and same for this brown one. I want it to go in between the petals. So I'm just going to twist it a little bit so it goes in between there, so the brown pokes out between the green. And then let's do the centers. I'm going to take the center of this one, stick it in there. You might need to hold it a second, depending on what kind of glue you're using. And we got this cute one. Give that a second to dry. Let's check this one. Okay, that looks pretty good. Okay, so let's adhere this one first, since it's obviously going to be a little bit more dry. Put some glue on the back, or you could do glue dots too. The flower petals are big enough that you could glue dot them. I'm going to put that one right here. I'm trying to keep it on the edge of my flower, on my envelope, my card base here, so that it will still fit in the envelope. If you want to poke off, or I'm going to use a different size envelope, or just give it to someone, you can let it fly off the edges there too. Okay, add some to this one. And this one I kind of tucked underneath one of these little petals, so I'm going to lift up one of the petals and just kind of slide my flower right underneath that one. Okay, and then we'll hold it down, give it a second to dry. And it'll probably take a minute or two to dry, so we're just going to leave it like that. So also, this month, you got a package of these great Say It in Crystals Prima crystals. They're so awesome. So you can use whichever ones you want. It actually came with 6 of these little flowers. I used mine on the card for the store already. So I'm going to go ahead and use those cute little flowers, and they're already adhesive stuff on the, well, this one fell off the tape, but they have pop dots on them already. So you just pop them up off of the pop dot, if you can get it off there. Well, let me remove it from this little plastic piece first. That might help. Okay, flower. Of course, it has to be difficult. Okay, let's try a different one. Okay, move over to a different flower. Okay, and I'm going to put those up here like this. I'm going to grab me another one. And I'm going to put that one right here. But there are enough of those little flowers for you to put 2 on each of your 3 cards. Or you could do these great little circle ones, but there's only 2 and they are different sizes, so you'd have to kind of variegate or decide how you're going to do it. Or you can do, there's enough of these, but again, they're different sizes. So next, I want to add, I think I'm going to add this cute one with the dots this time. I used something else on the last card, but I'm going to use this one this time. Put that in there. Oh, that's really sparkly. Look at that. That's awesome. Okay, and then let's do this little one here, this medium-sized one, on this one. Like that. Oh, yeah, I like that. Look at those. Those crystals are so awesome. So that is our April 2013 Watercoloring Monthly Card Kit, Sunset Rose. If you want to pick this up, head over to the store and see if it's still there. Just type Sunset Rose into the search bar. If not, check out this month's current kit, and then you get to watch the video with me when it's current. Otherwise, have a great day. Thanks for stopping in. Bye.